Here's some water.
Thank you. Okay. Yunten Gwingi Shigyo Jinshin Je Zushin Deme Lamgi Zawaru Lepa Dune Beba Dumayi Guba Jemba Demba Jingi Lo Linji Nyebe Dawe Nenzani Shindu Nigyu Jingu Shigyu Ne Ninzen Bundu Ningo Lembe Lo Yuje Meba Gewar Jingi Lo Luzo Yuwa Shuyu Shuguru Shin Yudu Jikbe Jiwa Demba Dang Shiwe Juzu Luga Jima Shin Kana Lende Jishin Rangwa La Niba Dembo Nyene Nyebe Tso Trashin Trawa Nangyang Bongwa Dang Kezo Tada Juba Jeba La Tadu Badan Demba Jingi Lo Chibe Minam Dudne Gungi Go Yide Milon Zimbe Bunzo Ki Nime Rene Narbe Dewala Dune Jemba Gewara Jingilo Namda Samba Deyi Tramba Yi Tendan Jishin Bayu Jimbo Yi Dembe Zawa Zozo Tabala Drupa Niko Chepa Jingilo Rani Sizo Lungwa Jishin Dua Mayo Jawa Kingyan Denowa Tene Dua Due Gyurwe Chancho Sanjo Juba Jingilo Senzang Kekyan Sotum Namzum La Mumba Mema Chancho Mingu Par Lepar Tune Gyase Tombala Zumba Jabo Lobar Jingilo Lobe Yola Yenwa Shishe Jing Yanda Tangla Zijin Shabayi Shine Ladon Zundu Jawe Lama Yudu Gila Gewar Jingilo Tumo Lamjan Nuru Gyapanam Tepa Gungi Shogyur Doje Tek Kezan Gewo Juno Damba De Telan Yudu Jubar Jingilo Teze Ngudru Namnyu Drupeshi Nanda Tamse Tumba Zunwala Chama Mebe Neba Negyo Ne Zotan Dude Zunwa Jingilo Tene Gyudu Nimbo Riniki Nena Jishin Tongne Zambayi Tunji Neje Jole Miya Wara Dambe Zijin Drubar Jingilo Teta Lamzan Dambe Jinyen Dan Zijin Drube Dana Jabden Jin Shinan Nangi Bardu Jebe Zon Yewa Jiwa Jingi Laptu So Jawa Kundu Yana Lama Dan Drame Jigi Bella Lanjuji Saran Langi Yandin Radoni Dorje Changi Gopan Yorto Sangye Sharan Sogi Jonam La Janjo Vardu Dani Gyasuji Dagi Jinye Gibe Sanangi Gola Benja Sangye Jubashu Sangye Charan Sogi Jonam La Janjo Vardu Dani Gyasuji Dagi Jinye Gibe Sanangi Gola Benja Sangye Jubashu Sangye Chodan Sogye Chodan La Janjo Bardu Dani Gyotsuji Ragi Chenye Gibe Sanangi Drola Bencher Sangye Druba Sho Saji Kuji Juji Meta Chan Riva Linji Ninde Gemba Di Sangye Shingdu Migde Waragi Jogun Namda Jinla Joba Sho Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayam.
Okay, so like to get to the verses a little bit. We kind of had like a college bull session last time, right?
That was great.
Okay, but before we do that, something to kind of help, I think, get the right kind of attitude or perspective about it is that I prepared a handout, which I think will be worth looking at. So this is all taken from Abhidharmakosha. Actually, the auto commentary of Vasubandhu's Abhidharmakosha Bhashya. You know, the 6th chapter is on the topic of the path. So it starts right. We're asking this question about why is it called the noble truth of nothing but suffering, right? Or suffering exclusively, if in fact there is some kind of sukha or some kind of well-being or comfort or pleasure also in samsara. So, Gangitse, right? Gangitse means when it's the case that Didala means here. Dawayang yerba. Dawayang yerba means there's also some kind of happiness in samsara. Right? Some kind of happiness in samsara. Why is the noble truth only noble truth of suffering? That's not. Then there are several kind of. This is the Abhidharmakosha is not to get into the history of it too much, but it's associated with the Sarvastivada Abhidharma tradition, which is mostly associated with northwestern India. There were originally 7 main sections or 7 main works that made up the Abhidharma canon, and then in that tradition, they developed some interpretations that came to be known as the Sarvastivada school. There are several works. One of the most important ones called the Mahavibhasha. So one of the reasons they call Vaibhashikas is because they're followers of the Vibhasha, Mahavibhasha text. So the Abhidharmakosha, which is written several centuries after this tradition sort of developed, is meant to be a compendium of that material. So it doesn't, the root text in particular is supposed to be exactly what the Vaibhashikas believed. And then in the auto commentary, Vasubandhu, part of the auto commentary is to explain literally what the verses mean. And then in some instances, he mentions points where there are differing views, or mainly, for instance, the Sautrantika school. The Sautrantika school is kind of developed in opposition to the Vaibhashikas or the Sarvastivadins, in that they felt some of their doctrinal views were philosophically unsound. So, having said that, most of these statements represent historical positions. So therefore, he starts out by saying kajinare. Kajinare means certain persons said the following in relation to this idea. Well, why do we say that all of samsara is suffering? And so this is an interesting statement. It might sound to you sort of simplistic, but actually it has a certain kind of what do you call it? A nuance to it, because it kind of gives it a kind of an aesthetic quality that conveys the point. And so it says, let me see. It says the reason is so it's kind of the reason. First time it says Delenuature means there's only a very small amount of happiness or pleasure in samsaric existence, and that's a pretty important theme in the practice, which is to say that in samsara, the amount of pleasures that we do experience, things that are so-called pleasures or nominal pleasures, are such that we should not be distracted by them, or we should not be attracted to them. And so this is one way of saying that. Say they're so minor, they're so infrequent, they're so insignificant that we shouldn't be drawn to them in any way. So it says that's why it's called the noble truth of suffering, where suffering is meant to be the dominant experiential quality of samsara. And then it gives the statement which is saying mudga is a kind of being, right? So it says Munsendu. Munsendu is the Tibetan translation for it. Mun is sen means being. Mun is this mudga. In Sanskrit, the word is mudga. Then it says in also by Yue Shindu, it says then it says another kind of being, Masha. Masha is the name of another kind of being, many different kinds of beings. So since we have a huge pile of Masha beings, right? Pile here is a heap, right? And intermixed in that huge pile of beings, there's a couple of Mudga beings. You can still call that a heap of Masha beings, even though there are some Mudga beings in it. So that's kind of one sort of response. But Shinte, it's like that. That's why we say that samsara is, exclusively suffering. And then it adds to that. I don't know if this is part of the same view or not. It says, it's the same term. Remember, we read from Asanga's text, right? The Yogacara Bhumi, that simile of the boil, right? That the three kinds of suffering were explained in terms of a boil, and then a boil that is bathed in cool water that's refreshing, or a boil that has some, like salt or something poured onto it, which intensifies it. Is descriptive of the three kinds of suffering. Well, here they use the same term, and it talks about the suffering of change. It says, what wise person, right? It says, Kewa Sushik means what wise person, Chu Dabe Dewa Chungu. It says, it looks like Chungdu, that it should be Nasha Chungu. It says, who is it, what wise person would maintain that a painful boil, right, that is bathed in cooling water, right, is somehow, real happiness, right, or genuine happiness. What intelligent person would consider a boil to be a pleasant experience because of the slight relief experienced by bathing it with cool water? So saying that, well, anyway, I don't want to do more interpreting. We've already talked about this a lot. But this is from the Abhidharma Kosha Bhasha. And you can see that this first point is addressing the idea of suffering of change. And those things which are considered to be pleasurable experiences, how is it that we should think of them as forms of suffering? So then here is a verse which is quoted, and this is attributed to an early Sarvastivada teacher, very early Sarvastivada, named Kumaralata, right, as he says, right? The attribution is made in the sub-commentary. So in the main text, right? This is Vasubandhu's auto-commentary. He quotes this verse. He doesn't, in the auto-commentary, tell you who wrote the verse, but there's a sub-commentary, right? Sub-commentary of Yashomitra, which I give you in the Tibetan, but I didn't translate it in English. So this verse is in the English. There's only this verse by Kumaralata, which addresses how it is that we can think of pleasurable experiences or ordinary pleasurable experiences as incorporated in the truth of suffering, and that we should therefore view them in some kind of unfavorable way. What is it about them that is hazardous or potentially, adding to the nature of samsaric suffering? And so this is the verse, right? Now, if you see in the Tibetan, I give you Yashomitra's sub-commentary on the verse. So what's underlined is the words in the verse, and then the rest of it is glossing it, okay? So it says, Yang Meba is the introduction to the verses that saying, moreover, the following has been said, right? So it says, Zumba Shunulengi. This is the name in Tibetan, Shunuleng. Shunuleng in Shunu. Zumba is Bhadanta. Bhadanta is an honorific. And then Kumaralata is his Sanskrit name. And he wrote a text, or early text, which I don't think it survived. It's called the 70 Verses on Suffering. So here it says, Dungel Dunjuba. Dungel Dunjuba. Leso means this is where this verse originates. So the first line says, first of all, the last line says, therefore pleasure is considered suffering. Right? Pleasure is not to be viewed as pleasurable experiences, such as they are, as infrequent as they are, as weak as they are in their samsaric form. They are not to be viewed favorably, and therefore they're to be viewed unfavorably. And in that sense, can be nominally said to be a form of suffering. So that is kind of a conventional Buddhist interpretation of how pleasurable experiences represent forms of suffering. Okay, so the first, there are three reasons. The first three lines give you those reasons. So it says, Dungel Gini Gyuchirdam. So pleasurable experiences are causes of suffering. Causes of suffering. Now, how is it that they're causes of suffering? They're causes of suffering, he says. Dewani, here this is now I'm reading from Yashomitra, right? This is, you have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Dewani means pleasurable experiences are in fact causes of suffering because because it says, literally, it says, because they are accompanied by the type of karma that is, when it ripens, is experienced as suffering. Okay? So what that is saying is that when we experience pleasures, to the extent that we are still subject to the mental afflictions, right? Then as we experience that pleasurable, event, we generate attachment. Right? Attachment, the mental affliction of attachment. And then that mental affliction of attachment itself, right, is a cause of, our future samsaric existence. And secondarily, it can provoke us, it's not saying this, but it can be understood, it can provoke us to engage in, overt kinds of non-virtuous behavior, right? To harm others, to steal, or to do some sort of physical harm, or any other kind of action in order to, re-experience pleasures that we don't have. And in that sense, that pleasurable experience, provoked the kind of karma that can be non-virtuous, can produce future suffering. Migewa, right? So another thing that is mentioned, which comes in another statement, is one of the things that pleasures induce for us is lack of mindfulness. Right? Lack of mindfulness, which a lack of mindfulness, or actually lack of mindfulness is not, it's too passive. The opposite of mindfulness is heedlessness, or some kind of rashness. Sort of like you feel a kind of, rush of pleasure, and then you just want to go wild. And that kind of, that sense of, wanting to relish and sort of, fully experience that pleasure, or even pursue that pleasure further, then that induces a kind of state of mind in which you might be willing to do something that you would not otherwise do if you were in a more composed state of mind. So that kind of pleasure can induce that kind of heedlessness. So that way, that heedlessness also is a mental affliction, right? Secondary mental affliction. Then second reason is dunga mangbo gejirta. Then pleasures also generate, right? Give rise to analpaka, and then it means analpaka literally is a double negative, means not insignificant suffering. So in Tibetan, mangbo means or not few sufferings. It means large amounts or frequent amounts of suffering. So what does that mean? Dunga mangbo gevechon shijawani dewani shenla tembatan shinla sokpe chebe. So in order, so saying we recognize pleasurable experiences as something desirable, something to seek, something to strive after, right? So if we make that determination, ordinary samsaric pleasures are worth pursuing, right? And once that decision has been made, then if you're not experiencing them, then what do I have to do to recreate that kind of pleasurable experience? So what is it going to take? So it says here, Shenla Tempa. Shenla Tempa means in some instances, you cannot do it on your own. So you have to rely on other persons, right? And Shenla Sokpe Chebe, Dunge Shintung Mamboke. Or if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the financial well-being to easily obtain pleasures that may require some outlay of money, then you have to engage in some kind of physical work. So it's Xing La Sokwa. Xing means then like agricultural work. And agricultural work is very strenuous, right? And other kinds of activities which bring about suffering. So in other words, if you really want those sufferings and those pleasures, and it's going to take this or that to get them, then you might have to subject yourself to various kinds of painful experiences in order to obtain it. And then the question obviously arises: is it really worth it? Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the second reason. So that's another reason not to be drawn to relatively unimportant, insignificant forms of ordinary pleasures, which are, as we've talked about before, they're pleasures of this life. And if we make them the focus of our interest, then we forget about the fact that life has a limit, and what we do in this life is what will determine what comes after this life. And so if we're seeking pleasures, then we're not using our time to the greatest advantage. So that also is then we pursue pleasures at our peril. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then the third one is Dunge Yöna Deducher. Dunge Yöna Deducher means that the desire for pleasures is something that is generally this idea of that pleasures are really the abatement of suffering. Mm. So the pleasures that we seek, this is a kind of subtle idea. This is to say that the reason that we seek pleasures in the first place is because our lives are subject to all kinds of hardships. And so we think of those pleasures as something that we need to pursue in order to alleviate kind of the natural hardships of our ordinary existence. So for a typical example here is hunger and thirst. Right? Whether we like it or not, we have to eat every day. Then the lack of sustenance, right, will create weakness, even illness, and so we have to kind of feed the body in order to stave off what is a form of discomfort. That is something that we is built into our being, and so that's really what pleasures are. A way of sort of trying to avoid or trying to eliminate or alleviate the normal discomfort of life. And so if we think of it that way, it means then that those pleasures are not something that are worthy of being pursued in and of themselves. Okay, so that's kind of the third one. So it's saying really the source of seeking pleasure, what is its real source, is that we seek pleasures because our lives are suffused with an unsatisfactory sort of foundation. And so if we understand that that's all that pleasures are, then that kind of should mitigate our sense of attachment to them. Right? And think of sort of food, for instance, right? In Hinayana, in the kind of the basic Buddhist position about food is that, of course, many people think of food as a source of pleasure, right? Why are there so many restaurants maybe because people, well, at any rate, people think of food as pleasurable, and they enjoy food in that way, or they prepare food, or they think of a meal in that sense as something that is kind of an enjoyable experience, a dinner party, right, and so on. And you get dressed up, and you invite your friends, and you make an event out of it, right? And then you kind of indulge, and you relish the food, right? That is completely antithetical to the kind of fundamental Buddhist position. That is so in what should we call it? Theravada Buddhism, or in kind of traditional the Buddhist path of especially of ordained people. The proper attitude is called Sekitsu Rikpa. Sekitsu Rikpa in Tibetan, it means what's the word? Knowing moderation with regard to food. Bojana matra nyata is the Sanskrit word. And this is a whole kind of lifestyle doctrine about how to approach food. It has a whole lot of dimensions to it. To eat enough, but not too much. That is essential for meditation, for example. That food that's eaten in excess promotes lethargy, right? That's physical. That's physiological. That has to do with meditation. But then there's a mental component too, which is that if you allow your mind to become sort of delighting in the food, then you can develop a kind of it's a secondary mental affliction. It's called gyakpa. Gyakpa is a kind of it's not. I guess it's a sort of pride. It's a form of pride, but it's a kind of pride. It's a pride of a kind of pride that where one thinks highly of oneself. For instance, you can think highly of yourself for your knowledge. You can think highly of yourself for your social standing. You can think highly of yourself for your wealth. You can think highly of yourself for your athleticism. And then there is a kind of youthfulness, right? The people out there, in the flower, the bloom of their youth, there's this kind of arrogance, right? And that can manifest itself in relation to food. So these are all elements that can represent improper ways of addressing the necessity to eat, right? Whereas for the Buddhist, then it's just that you should eat food and with the idea that it is like medicine. So medicine is usually thought of as something bitter and doesn't really taste good, but you take it because you need it in order to maintain your health or to restore your health. So food should be thought of the same way. It's kind of the idea that you eat the food with a sense of equanimity, like chew your food 30 times or whatever. I don't know if there's anything like that in Buddhism, but you eat it. You eat with a sense of kind of calm, and there are various things to think about too. You can think about the unattractiveness, right? Where did the food come from? It came from the field, mud, and then dung in the field, and that's necessary to create the food. And then it looks very nice on the plate when it's prepared by a good cook. Once it gets in your mouth, you start chewing it, and your saliva gets mixed up with it. It's not really pretty. If you spit it out on the plate, everybody thinks that's disgusting. And guess what happens after you digest it? And the waste comes out the lower extremities, and that's kind of the essence of food. So you think of it that way, then you think of it as something that is not deserving of attachment or desire. So that's kind of the opposite of thinking about food as something to, a source of pleasure and to delight in. Oh, let's go out to a restaurant. Let's go have fun. Let's go to a nice restaurant, white tablecloths and good food and waiters and all that stuff. Right? So, then saying then really going back to it, really the reason that we eat food is because if we don't, right, then we won't survive. So the discomfort that comes with hunger, even hunger itself is an inducement to eat, right, biologically, and that the eating of food and so on is really to kind of stave off that unpleasantness, and that's its sole purpose. So anyway, okay, so therefore pleasant experiences should be thought of as a kind of there's something unsatisfactory. That's the essence of suffering, is that a kind of unsatisfactoriness associated even with pleasurable experiences. So that's kind of very conventional attitude towards the suffering of change, right? Then now we shift to the next passage, which is also from the Abhidharmakosha. This is the position that that Vasubandhu takes, and that this is kind of more metaphysical, and which Chandrakirti also, in his commentary to Ayadeva's text, in fact, explicitly addresses this very point. So Vasubandhu introduces the topic by saying, then those feelings, right? Pleasure itself is essentially a kind of feeling, right? The second skanda, Vedana, or sorrow in Tibetan. It says those things which are by their very by their essential quality, right? Swalakshana. Swalakshana means its unique attribute, right? The nature of a so-called pleasurable experience, by virtue of its unique attribute, is something that is, in Tibetan it says dura, right? Something that is desirable, right? I put a footnote saying that Sanskrit is not really desire in the sense of attachment desire, but rather it is a sense of being something that is thought of approvingly, something that is regarded well, right? So that's more neutral, right? So the pleasurable feelings are by their nature something which is regarded as it's enjoyable. So when you experience it, you have this in Vasubandhu's root. He wrote a short work on the five skandhas, and when he's discussing the three kind of Vedanas, he defines pleasurable experiences as those things which, when they are experienced, you don't want them to stop. You don't want them to end, and when they do end, you want them, to be, experienced again in the future, right? So that's talking about the essential quality of what pleasurableness means. So he says, if that's true, right? If that's the nature, has the essential characteristic of being agreeable, then there is no way in which it could ever be other than that. So there's no way that you could say that quality, that kind of, desirableness about pleasurable feelings could never be thought of the way unpleasant feelings are. Unpleasant feelings are such that by their very nature, when you experience them, you want them to stop, you want them to end, and you don't want them to return, right? So that's kind of the basic difference between pleasure and pain, right? He says, So this is kind of the metaphysical point, right? That's the difference between pleasure and pain. And then he says, so if we as Buddhist practitioners, and more specifically he uses the word Aryas here, so if the Aryas are going to overcome whatever kind of natural inclination you have to be drawn to pleasurable experiences, it's going to have to be something, rational to discredit them, right? And to make them sort of not deserving of our desire, not deserving of our wanting to pursue them, right? So it says, in the Sanskrit it says, Mishe Bargyura. Mishe Bargyura means what would make them, then that's Mishe Bargyura is the opposite of Durva, right? Mm-hmm. Something that makes them not desirable, right? That we should sort of forego any possibility of seeking pleasure, right? He says, and then here's this word, Sun Jimbarcheva, right? Sun Jimbarcheva means, let's see, where is it? It means to undermine them, right? To discredit them. We have to use our reasoning to do that. This is a big part. This is a big part of Buddhist practice. A big part of Buddhist practice is to use your reasoning to control your emotion, especially in relation to the mental affliction, right? In this case, desire for pleasurable feelings. So the way to sort of gain control of that desire or to sublimate that desire is by telling yourself, associating something undesirable with that experience. And if you can convince yourself, if you can be, you can have a sense of certainty that in fact pleasurable feelings have a potential of doing bringing me something that I don't want, right? Then that will supersede sort of the natural inclination to be drawn to them. And that's a very important concept for Buddhist practice. It definitely applies in meditation, and I strongly feel it has a very important role to play in cultivating morality as well. The same principle applies. Okay, so here we go. So he says, well, so what would that be? And so here he says, the things that can enable us to undermine our attraction for pleasurable feelings is then to view, right? So it says here at the end of the line, it says mitapa tai, right? You see tai? It says bagmebe ne dang. Number du chawa chembo druber chawa dang. Number gyurwa chen dang. Mitapa tai, right? Right? That tai means we should view. We should view pleasurable experiences as having these qualities associated with them. Number one is it is a source of heedlessness. We already talked about that in relation to food, right? So that's one. So pleasure, we can get so excited about the experiencing of pleasure that excitement, right? That sense of excitement will cloud our judgment, and that our clouded judgment can override, right, our values regarding right and wrong, for instance. So that's one thing to be wary of. Then it says, another one is that if we become overly concerned in the pursuit of pleasures, then we will give all our time, we'll have to devote all our time to pursuing pleasures, and that takes a certain amount of effort, a great amount of effort in order to pursue pleasures, and then we won't be able to pursue anything. It's not stated explicitly, but it implies, it's understood that you won't be able to use your time in other ways, for example, for spiritual activity. So great exertion to acquire. Pleasures are, they're not just there for the taking. We have to, devote our time and effort in order to satisfy that desire. And number 3 is they change. That's the whole kind of essence of the suffering of change, is that they're not enduring, right? They always come to an end, like that. Or even they can also, pursued in excess, right? They can in fact lead to discomfort, right? Overeating can, instead of generating pleasure, can call it, what is it? Indigestion, right? At the end of the life. And the other thing is that they are impermanent. And so things that are essentially impermanent, even pleasure, therefore they are evanescent, constantly changing, sort of nothing to kind of really take hold of, because they're ending the very moment that they come into being. So they're unattainable, even like that. And because that's what he's saying. That's the way in which we can think of pleasurable experiences as not worthy of being pursued. That's the only way we can do it, is by that kind of reasoning. We can't sort of experientially see pleasurable experiences as undesirable. That's one point. And then the next point it says is, if there were some way, right? This is the second point. Right now he says, if it were such that it could, pleasurable experiences are somehow arbitrary, right? And that certain people perceive one experience as pleasurable, but other people could in fact, experientially experience the same experience as painful. He said, then maybe that would be the case. It's not so. Pleasure is pleasure for for the wise man and the fool, you might say. So here it says, so if it were disagreeable by its own nature, right? That is, then people would not feel drawn to it in the first place, right? But that's not the case, right? So pleasures are such that we have to develop some kind of way of thinking of them as having the potential of bringing us harm, because on the face of it they seem certainly desirable, right? Like that. Okay. What's the last part? So he's saying, so he says, it would have to be some other, we have to think of it in some other way as being flawed, right? The pleasurable experiences are flawed, not by their very experiential quality, but by some other nature that relates to, quality of life or meaning of life or purpose of life or whatever, and in order to develop and become free of detachment. So if we're going to become detached from pleasures, we have to use our reasoning powers in order to overcome our natural attraction to pleasure. So he says, and so here's the conclusion, right? Therefore, so it must be the case that pleasant feelings, right, exist by virtue of having their own essential characteristic, which is that kind of inherently desirable aspect to it, right? And that is the position of Vasubandhu, and that is the view that Chandrakirti disagrees with. Now, then finally, before we go to the verses, Vasubandhu also describes another position other than the one he just explained, which is his own, which is that pleasant feelings are are nothing more than a lesser form of unpleasant experience, and therefore their so-called pleasantness is by virtue of the fact that they replace something that was more unpleasant. And that's all pleasant feelings are. So that's the antithesis of the position that Vasubandhu just described. Okay? So here he says, Kajig nare. And this is attributed to Shirilata, right? Shirilata is another Sautrantika. Now, this is a Sautrantika scholar who is opposes the Vaibhashika. Okay. So this is in Yasamitra's sub-commentary. He identifies it as Vasubandhu is here presenting the position held by this Sautrantika scholar named Shirilata. So certain persons claim there are no such things as actually pleasant feelings. It's due to some kind of error that we perceive them as pleasurable and think of them as desirable. And it says, therefore, everything is nothing but suffering, right? All feelings, properly understood, are nothing but suffering. Now, so that's a obviously diametrically opposite position, and so then the question becomes, which one is right? No? And so I'm putting it here because this is in fact Chandrakirti's view. Okay, so it says, how is this view to be understood? And now these are the classic ways of describing this position from early times, from times at which this school called the Sautrantikas arose kind of in opposition to the Sarvastivadis. Okay, so he says this is Vasubandhu sort of presenting the position. How do they put forward this position? He says they base it on reasoning and on scriptural authority, on sutra. Through sutra passages and through reason. And that's kind of the classic way of explaining any doctrinal position, is there should be some sutra passage that gives voice to it, and then there should be some reason that supports the interpretation that you're giving to that passage. Okay. So these are the phrases that are found in sutras, and this is the first one is it's very classic, right? Anything, whatever that is experienced, right? Anything that is kimchit, anything at all that is experienced here, right here, in samsara, is of suffering, is suffering experience. Now that could mean an unsatisfactory. It has an unsatisfactoriness to it, in the way that pleasurable feelings need to be seen as unsatisfactory, the suffering of change, and painful experiences are inherently unsatisfactory. And then neutral feelings, neutral samsaric feelings, are also unsatisfactory at a level that the ordinary person has difficulty sort of comprehending. But the Buddha is saying all of those experiences in their own separate way, in their own individual way, are some kind of suffering. Here it's being interpreted as saying that those things that we think of as pleasant experiences are in fact qualitatively unsatisfactory, right? According to this view. And then another passage. What's the second passage is? Where is it? Okay. Then I'm kind of going through all three of them. Okay. Second one is Dewe Tsorwani Dungel du Tawar Chao. Dewe Tsorwani Dungel du Tawar Chao. So this is a in a sutra. Apparently, this phrase occurs. It's just saying pleasant feelings, right? Dewe Tsorwa should be regarded as unsatisfactory or as a form of suffering, right? So that's again saying directly that pleasant feelings should somehow be regarded as unsatisfactory. Now, of course, the Vaibhashikas are not going to say that that's a false statement. They're going to interpret it a different way, right? In the way, for instance, that was Vasubandhu mentioned in the previous passage. Here it's being said, no, this really means literally that pleasant feelings should be properly seen as being unsatisfactory in and of themselves, right? And then here's the third passage. Now these are the four, this is a reference to the four kind of inverted beliefs, right? You form a here it says a conception, right? A erring conception. Right? Sanskrit was what? Like viparyasa, right? Viparyasa is that meaning that it is inverted, right? So what is actually unsatisfactory is seen as pleasant, right? That's the first thing. That's the opposite of it. What is impermanent is seen as permanent in an inverted way. So here it's saying an inverted conception that views suffering, what is actually suffering, as pleasant. Okay, so this is the third passage. And again, it's saying literally those things that are properly experienced as unsatisfactory are improperly perceived as being somehow pleasant. Okay, so those are the scriptural passages. Now, what are the reasons that support this position? Okay. So, Karasa, Rishik Doleni Detabuo. So those are sutra passages that are cited as basis for this view. How are they to be understood? What kind of reasoning supports this interpretation? And it says, okay, so here, this is one. And this one comes in Aryadeva's text, right? So first one says, Dewe Gyu, number minevich, right? Dewe Gyu means that thing which is recognized as the cause of some kind of pleasant experience, right? Is not invariably so. It's not invariably a cause for a pleasant experience. So it may in fact be something that initially induces some kind of pleasant feeling, but if you continue to apply that same cause, that same condition, whatever it is, it can change from a cause of pleasant experience into unpleasant. Right? So it's like if you indulge something excessively, for instance. So, for example, this is a classic example is if you are if you've been walking for a long period of time, right, and you become physically tired from walking, okay, so you feel the discomfort, the pain, the fatigue, and so what do? You want to let's find some place to sit down, okay. So then sitting down, right, becomes a source of relief from that fatigue, and initially it is experienced as satisfying, right? The continued walking is, stops, and so there's a sense of satisfaction, comfort of sitting down. Oh, this is nice. But if you stay seated continually, then eventually you're going to develop some kind of unpleasantness when you sit for too long, right? Like we say, what is it? Sedentary, right? Someone who has a sedentary lifestyle, right? It's bad for you, right? And it is bad for you, right? In fact, it's promotes all kinds of. So what was in certain circumstances a source of pleasantness can become, in other situations, the very same thing, sitting, can in fact take on a different quality of not being the cause of pleasantness or pleasant experience, right? So that's that which is considered to be a cause of pleasantness does not is not so in an absolute sense, right? Okay. Devegyu number minne, right? So that's the first one. Pleasant feelings do not have a fixed nature. So here we have kachik devegyu. So some things which are considered causes of satisfaction or pleasantness, for instance, drinking and eating to alleviate hunger and thirst, right? And coolness, right? In the hot of the summer, you turn on the air conditioning. But if you leave it on too long or you turn it up too high, it becomes unpleasant. Right? Same way, drugs in the winter. If you're cold, you go and you light a fire. But if you make the fire too big or you sit too close to it, eventually it becomes unpleasant. Right? Then those things, those food, drink, coolness, and heat, which are considered to be sources that alleviate some kind of suffering and therefore are causes of pleasantness. It's those very things, if you indulge in them to an excess, then, or if you indulge in them at an inappropriate time, they can in fact have the opposite effect. Right? It can become a cause of suffering. Okay, so that is a reasoning, an indication to suggest that that what we think of as pleasantness is not inherently a kind of pleasantness, but just some sort of temporary, in between state that seems pleasant, but it's not actually pleasant. The other reason it seems pleasant is because it's the alleviation of something that is more undesirable than that. But if you take that experience in and of itself, there's nothing about it that's inherently pleasurable. Okay, now this is another reason, right? Okay, I'm trying to find the translation. Oh yeah, so here it is saying, if in fact there or anything that was considered to be a cause of genuine pleasurable feelings, then the idea is, it comes in one of the verses. If something is a source of pain, right? If you increase that, the cause of that pain, the pain will in fact be bigger. That's the nature of pain. Pleasure is not that way. So if whatever is the cause of pleasure, right? If that pleasure were had the same status, the same sort of validity that suffering does, and that was a true kind of pleasurable thing, and whatever activity or cause produced that pleasure, if more of it should give you more pleasure, but not the case. Right?
That's provocative.
Okay, well,
yeah.
So this is another argument, right? Or And it should never be the case that if something produces pleasure in one particular situation, that some other situation it would provoke unpleasantness, right? So one is saying whatever is a cause of pleasure, if you dial that cause up, make it more intense, it should bring more pleasure. As one reason, one way of presenting it. And the other is, if something in one given situation produces pleasure, then at a different time, in other circumstances, the same cause should produce the same kind of pleasant experience. That's not always the case. Yeah, so it says that 대단히 담보 그래서 두시나 두메께바 르파 마임베. It's not reasonable for those one cause, something that causes suffering in one situation should in another situation produce something, an unpleasant sensation. Therefore, 당복하나니 등의 규다 인신. So it says, therefore, from the very beginning, those causes, the causes of those experiences are in fact therefore causes of something that is unsatisfactory. And they are not causes of something that is an inherently valid, unique, distinct kind of pleasurable experience. Right? So here it says, Juktu means at a later time, right? Continuing to apply that ostensible cause of suffering will lead to the arising of unpleasantness, right? That suffering does increase and become apparent. Well, that's like sitting for too long. Right? So here he uses the Jalam is physical activity. The four main kinds of physical activity are walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. Any one of them done to an excess will become unpleasant at some point. Okay. This can also be described in a similar manner with regard to particular modes of physical behavior. Right? So this word, there's a footnote telling you. Okay, what's the rest of it? Right, so now this is saying that the reason that they are thought of as being pleasant is because they are serving as a remedy for some unpleasantness, right? So what I say, an unpleasant feeling has been assuaged, right? Or they are replacing some other overt kind of suffering. So something, if you carry a heavy burden on one shoulder, then that is an unpleasant feeling, right? And so if you shift it to the other shoulder, that also was not pleasant, but it's less unpleasant than the pain that you felt when it was on the other shoulder. And so that's all pleasant sensations are. So either they are temporary reprieve from unpleasantness, or they're just shifting pain from one place to another. Okay. All right. So it's pretty. That's kind of the basis of it. 미케바 남니 연복하는 대외로 죽게 되와 라니. So it's only in the sense of being a remedy for some kind of unpleasantness, that the wise person recognizes that that pleasant feelings are really a temporary relief from some kind of unpleasantness, and they are not actual forms of inherently valid kinds of pleasant, distinct pleasant feelings. And then it says, let's see, Jiva. What's this last one? Should be recalculated. Oh, so it's some specific kind of suffering that the immature person, right? Immature person means the non-arya, the samsaric being, the deluded person develops a sense of pleasantness or pleasure toward. And then it gives this example. Like shifting a burden from one shoulder to the other. Therefore, okay, so this is, therefore they say there is no such thing as genuine pleasure, genuine pleasant feeling. Okay, all right, yes, go ahead. I won't get on.
So I think the reason why I was thinking, why am I struggling so much with this idea of no pleasant feelings?
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me is because, so much of the teachings on karma talk about acting virtuously, not acting on virtue, because then you generate some karma, which then ripen as
something desirable.
Something desirable and
Correct.
Pleasant.
Yes.
And then I've heard teachers say that karma ripens in the aggregate of feeling. That the pleasant feelings,
right.
and so there was.
Well, but okay, go ahead.
So this was that confusion going on in my head. Like half the time, we encouraged to act wholesomely because they will ripen in pleasant feelings,
right.
which is what I want.
Right.
And then especially like in the small scope,
that's
what you encourage.
Right. Yes. Well, I think I first of all, the idea of pursuing virtuous actions as a proper lifestyle or proper spiritual undertaking has different kind of levels to it. The basic one is, like you said, is the fear that if we don't do that, the prospects are terrible and terrifying, and so therefore, if we know what's good for us, we'll engage in virtuous behavior because that will avert that disaster. And so this is a kind of favorable outcome of doing that kind of behavior, and I'm not diminishing that at all. It is a it is a kind of instruction. It is a teaching. So in another sense, it's a limited position, right? It's not an end. It's not really a final kind of goal. If you are, should I say, if you're more devout, or if you have a different perspective that sees that as something that is not an end in itself, and something that may in fact not be, you may not be able to keep doing it in lifetime after lifetime, and so on. So that doesn't, and the favorableness of such positive rebirth, and in fact within a positive rebirth, favorable experiences that you encounter, whatever they might be, wealth, health, knowledge, those are those can be referred to and described as something worthwhile, certainly, and even, favorable or pleasant, even, relatively speaking. And yet, that doesn't need to be in direct contradiction with the point that's being made here, right? And I think foremost, what this point, what this kind of level of discussion is about, is the kind of the goal of taking a kind of absolute position towards all of samsara, top to bottom, right? So it says, renunciation, the real test of renunciation is if you can think of, and the Tibetan word sibe punsok. Siba is another word for samsara. It's bhava, it's like existence, samsara existence. Punsok means any kind of excellence, any kind of abundance, any kind of, so the worlds of the gods, for instance. The worlds of the samsaric gods, if you read the description of them, compared to human beings, is, makes our life look, paltry and, undesirable at all. But renunciation means that we should be able to recognize that such kind of, seemingly, wonderful, divine samsaric states are nevertheless, in a deeper sense, something to want to avoid, right? And so I don't want to, we can talk about that, but so
Yeah.
all right, so it's not saying that they don't have something about them that is attractive or something that could seem, to be alluring even or attractive to you, but from a different point of view, all of that is, a kind of.
So it's almost like all this is to help me understand that even though I may have favorable conditions, don't get caught up, ensnared in them, and that if you look deeper, then that helps me move like from small scope to medium scope.
Right.
Kind of idea.
Having said that, even in the Lamrim, for instance, in the Lamrim, in the section on the person of smaller scope, there is a unique instruction, which is to pursue the kinds of virtuous activities that will not only bring you a favorable rebirth, but will, they're called Namingi and Denge. Means there are 8 maturation qualities which are desirable. And the word desirable doesn't occur to me, but they are desirable, and their source is actually the Bodhisattva Bhumi. And they're not really meant as qualities that are associated with the person of smaller scope. They're really qualities that are thought of as being essential for a bodhisattva, in that they will allow him or her to be able to benefit others in a more far-reaching way than might otherwise be possible. So that's another kind of perspective towards, cultivating virtuous karma, but not for the end of experiencing those favorable qualities, but because they are a means towards some other larger purpose. So it really depends on your perspective. Okay. All right. So let's go. Let's read some verses. We haven't done that for a while. Now going back to Gyaltsabje's commentary, I my notes show that we're at verse 12. Yeah. And this section it's in the outline of Getzabji's commentary. Let's see where we are. This would be verse. This is verse 12, so it would be 37, I guess, in this book. So, it doesn't. She didn't give the outline in the commentary. That's interesting. 35 actually is the verse. Is that right? No. It should be 30. Oh yeah, 37. Okay. So here she doesn't give the outline. The outline is in the appendix.
It is.
Right? And in the outline in the appendix, just sort
Page 308.
So this is one a section, the third section, which says refuting the existence of real pleasure. Right? This topic that we've been talking about. Dewa Rangzemba Gakpa, right? Dewa Rangzemba Yerba Gakpa. So refuting that there is such a thing as pleasant feelings that exist in and of themselves, or are pleasurable in and of themselves. And so there are 5 sections to this. This is like, I think this goes all the way up to verse 23. So except for the last 2 verses of the chapter, it's all addressing this point about pleasurable feelings not being really pleasurable. And so let's see. Okay. This is okay. Verse 12. So we have. So the word in this first verse, this verse 12, is something increasing. The quality of increasing, an increasing pleasure, right? So it says, okay, the outline says, Dewa, this first section is Dungerang. Okay, Dungerang means there is suffering, right? Which conventionally, this again is all talking about conventional truths, not talking about ultimate truth, because ultimately there's no self-existent suffering. No, suffering has no self-existent essence. But conventionally, there is some kind of essential quality which we can identify as unpleasant, right? On the other hand, position of this school, Chandrakirti school, and the one that we read that Bhasbandhu described, is that's not the case for pleasant feelings. There's no such thing as a pleasant feeling that we can identify as having its own essential quality that constitutes a distinct form of pleasant quality, right? So, okay, so this first section, which is, I think, at least 2 verses, is addressing that, and it's worthwhile to think of them in that respect, because the verses themselves don't use that language. They don't say, Aryadeva doesn't say in any of the verses, by the way, those things that we think of as pleasurable are not pleasurable, inherently. There's no inherent thing. There's no such thing as an inherent pleasure, or something that is inherently pleasurable. So his verses are interpreted by the commentary as nevertheless conveying that position. And if you examine them from the point of view of the passage, for instance, that we just read, you'll see that they fit into that position. All right. So here, the first verse is pleasure itself, right? Pleasure itself cannot increase, indefinitely, right? That what something that might start out as pleasure, right? That what we think of as attractive and enjoyable about that pleasurable experience can show a certain kind of increment to it, but that increment is limited, and at some point it can in fact turn back on itself and become unpleasant. Okay, pain, on the other hand, not so. Pain is something that when it starts out as pain, it can grow and grow and grow and just get worse, right? And become unbearable. So the first half of the verse. So let's read the commentary along with it. So the first one is this is so there is something that is inherently painful in its nature, but there's not something that is inherently pleasurable in terms of its unique attribute. There's not a unique attribute that can be identified as the quality of being pleasurable. Okay, so this point has two verses that address it. The first one is Dewa Jungse Pelwa Dangwoni, right? Dangwola, right? Dangwola ni Dewa Jungse Pelwa Tong. Okay, so it says the words are very interesting. I know we should think of the words because they are analyzing the verse. Okay, so he's saying Dewa Jungse Pelwa Tong. Pelwa means increase, right? Or become augmented. To a slight degree. Jungse means to a slight degree that can be observed. Dewa Pelwa Dewa Jungse Pelwa Tongwe. And it says, however, he says that quality of that, increasing or strengthening pleasure to some degree is not evidence of that quality of pleasantness being something that exists in and of itself. Okay? Ranzembe dewa yeba mindrupa. So it says the fact that we can see that there are experiences that we can call pleasurable, and they can in fact, as an experience, become more pleasurable for some period of time. But that quality of being pleasurable, being identified as pleasurable, being thought of as pleasurable, being thought of as something that can become more pleasurable, right, is not evidence that there is such a thing as genuinely pleasurable experience. And he says, why? Okay, why is that not evidence that there is such a thing as genuinely pleasurable experiences? Okay, he says, so it starts out with this introduction. It says, if there were, these are always like hypotheticals, right? Chandakirti will introduce a verse as saying something that would be the opposite point of view, right? If there were no such thing as actual pleasure, right? Then we couldn't, if there weren't, we couldn't say, if there were no such thing as pleasure, we couldn't say that pleasure increases, right? If something increases, it has to be there in the first place in order to increase, right? So the fact that we do see pleasure as something that can become stronger, can become deeper, can become more pleasurable, then that should be evidence of the fact that there is such a thing as genuine pleasurable experience that is its own sui generis kind of experience. Okay, that's kind of the position that is in opposition to Chandrakirti and Aryadeva's and Kumaralata's view, right? So here, this verse is meant to address that. Okay, he says, not the case. It's not the case. The fact that pleasures do in fact show some semblance of increasing and becoming stronger, the fact is, right, What is also observed about those pleasures that have a certain arc to them is that at some point that peaks and then it goes the other way, right? So it says, yata dursto means in the way that it is seen, right? Jidar tonwa, right? That increasing pleasure, viparyaya means turns around, goes back the other way, becomes painful, is not the case with suffering. Suffering doesn't have that sort of natural tendency, built-in tendency to peak and then disappear. So, dukkasya vardamanasya tata nasti viparyaya. So it says, suffering doesn't show that kind of tendency to necessarily become reversed and diminish and disappear. Okay, that's the first point. So that's a distinction between what is observed to be pleasurable and what is observed to be painful. And this verse is being put forward as a way of saying what we think of as being pleasurable is so a little bit more evanescent, a little bit more ephemeral than pain. Pain is indisputable. Pain is, kind of, and what should I say? It has more than it's the quality of being painful is more sort of incontrovertible. Okay, so the commentary is spelling out the verse, which is pretty straightforward, right? So increasing means to a higher and higher degree, so becoming more and more pleasurable. Dewa jitadokwa. Jitadokwa means how it reverses, means it then becomes painful, right? So suffering does not turn into pleasurable experience. Pleasurable experience can turn into unpleasant experience. Painful experience does not sort of undergo the same kind of reversal in which it becomes pleasurable, right? Despite what masochists want.
I was just thinking that very thing.
Wow.
Because in that situation, the sensation remains painful, but the mental factor that goes
That's
along
not
with it
good.
might
I
find
have no
satisfaction.
personal experience.
I don't either. I'm not.
But without going into masochism, just like long distance running, right?
Yeah.
You're going through and you go through this wall of pain and then you get this euphoria. It's not the same because the euphoria is a hormone that comes on. So it is in fact pleasure and it doesn't last.
Mhm.
So it's really
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, at the end of the race, you still feel exhausted.
For days. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so it says, so he's saying pain does not have the quality that, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and then at some point, it peters out and then it gets replaced by something pleasurable. That's not really the case. It's saying. There's always exceptions that or seeming exceptions that you can raise. We're talking about kind of, in ordinary circumstances, right? Right? It says when suffering increases, right, the body and the mind become extremely tormented, become extremely afflicted, right? As pain increases, right? On the other hand, a pleasurable experience, indulged to try to, make it last longer and become stronger. That if you engage in the same kind of behavior, it will eventually become, fall in on itself and become unpleasant, right? Perna, and then here it gives this example. Gyabungalenu. Gyabungalenu is King Mandata. King Mandata is this, do you know that name? No. So it's a mythological person, a mythological king that I believe is known in not Vedic literature, but in non-Buddhist Indian tradition, but it has been incorporated in Buddhism as well as a figure. In fact, there is the story of King Mandata is told in one of the Avadanas. So the Avadanas are different from Jatakas, right? Jatakas are canonical stories, right, that are represented as being the previous lives of Buddha Shakyamuni, in which he was a bodhisattva, right, on the path to enlightenment, but not enlightened, and animals in many different forms. The Avadanas, however, they're also canonical. A lot of them are found in the Vinaya literature, and there is also there's even a Sanskrit work which is called Divya Avadana. Divya Avadana, it's the title of this work, which is a compilation of a number of stories that are found somewhere in canonical literature, and then they were extracted and put into this this collection. So, by the way, the Divya Avadana is now available in English. I think I translated his name, but it's available in 2 volumes, and they're very interesting. Well, I don't have too much time talking about it, but some of them are very beautiful. One of them is the story of one of the 16 arhats. One of the 16 arhats was Chudapantaka, is his name, Sanskrit, Lamtremba, and Chudapantaka was the younger brother of Mahatmaka, who had become an arhat, in fact. And the younger brother was very dull-witted, and this beautiful story of how nobody could, he was accepted into the order, and yet he couldn't develop at all his knowledge, and he was ridiculed, and he was humiliated, and then eventually the Buddha took him under his wing, and the Buddha put him to work cleaning the sandals of the monks. This is a famous story for Lamrim practice. Durupango, Jimapango, right? So in Lamrim literature, I'm digressing, but I love the story anyway. So the Lamrim practice is meant to be meditated on. It's not just something that you learn. It's meant to be practiced in a very formal way. And so there are 6 preliminary practices that are meant to be engaged in before you actually undertake the actual meditation practice itself. So among these 6 preliminary practices, first one is is to clean your meditation area and then arrange the altar. That's the first one. So you're supposed to clean every day your meditation area. And so as the story goes, when you're cleaning, when you're dusting, when you're sweeping your meditation area, it's not an ordinary physical impurity that you're cleaning away. You're cleaning away some internal mental defect, the dust of the mental afflictions. And so anyway, one of the main sources for that exercise is Chudapantaka's story, and how he developed himself by cleaning first the monks' shoes and then later the temple itself. And he had a realization. That realization was, oh, the Buddha had me cleaning these things, but he didn't mean to just cleaning the dirt. He meant cleaning the mind. And then he had this realization, and he became an arhat. And he's known, you know, a lot of the their different disciples are recognized as, what is it? Shariputra is Shirapichok, right? He's the one whose wisdom is among all the disciples the highest. And Moggallana is the one whose magical powers are the greatest, Jatubichok. And Chuddapandaka is known as the most effective disciple for bringing about a change in others by his teaching. That he became skillful at instructing others and causing them to make progress. So it's a very beautiful story, and that is an Avadana, his story. So anyway, it's a long process of what Avadana is. So there is a Mandata Avadana. Mandata is the name of this mythical king, and he lived, in the great past, distant past. And in the story, in the Buddhist Avadana, Buddha identifies himself as having been King Mandata. At any rate, King Mandata is known for the fact that he was very successful in all. It's a very famous story. How he got that way was that in all of these Avadanas, so what qualified that person in that particular life to have the unique qualities that he or she had. So what made Chuddapandaka dull-witted, for instance? And so what made King Mandata, so successful as a king that his empire grew, he gained dominion over all the continents, and his the royal, those 7 symbols of royal authority, he possessed them in their highest form. Was that in a former life, Buddha Vipassin came near, was walking by or something like that, and Mandata in that former life took some beans, and tossed them at Buddha Vipassin's begging bowl. And 4 beans went into the bowl, and 1 of the beans did not. And this was the former virtuous act that caused him to be this extremely, powerful and successful king. And as the story goes, he has a challenge, and he goes out and meets a challenge, and he wins, and his domain and his wealth grows and grows and grows, and then he ends up hearing about Chakra. Chakra is Indra. And so he decides he wants to get some of Indra's wealth. And so, in fact, he does battle with there's this kind of this constant struggle between the gods and the demigods, right? And sometimes one is more, there are times that one is sort of temporarily so some becomes more successful than the other. So Mandata comes along, and he gets rid of all the demigods, and ends up that he is awarded half of Chakra's, vast wealth on top of, at his palace on top of Mount Meru. So he has half of the wealth, okay? But then Mandata says, not enough, I want it all. And as soon as he decided he wanted all of Chakra's wealth, then he falls back to the earth. And that's the story of, that's kind of the last part of Mandata's story, is so he falls down again, and then he's at the point of dying, and then gives this instruction, or saying that one's greed should not be allowed to grow unchecked, or something like that. So here, that story is alluded to in this verse, saying, what's my place now? Oh yeah. So it says, "Berna gyabongalenu jajingi tenche derbe." Right? He wanted half of Chakra's seat. Right? His seat means his throne. Right? And because it's not the first half that he wanted the second half. He had already gotten the first half. He wanted all of it. That's because he wanted the other half of Chakra's throne. So this simile is cited as a way of indicating that pleasure can grow, but not in an unlimited way. It will eventually change. So it's kind of a poetic allusion there. So let's see. Jajingi tenche derbe, wato tumenshir, malinu dewa, shedu member pe shimba. Right. So it says Mandata's wealth and Mandata's pleasure, Mandata's success was growing and growing and growing. It seemed like there was nothing that would limit him at his success. Nevertheless, while it was increasing ever more, eventually it was shown to reverse itself, and then he fell back to earth. Dungel la Maino, and then here this is Chandrakirti says that quality of increasing success and pleasure that will come to an end and can in fact end in great misfortune and calamity. He says that the same is not true of suffering. That suffering can increase and increase and increasing, and there's always more suffering that you can be exposed to.
But Art, how do you resolve that everything is impermanent? So even suffering must be impermanent? There's more of it, perhaps, depending on your evaluation of what is suffering. But doesn't it also have impermanence? So therefore it can't increase forever. It has to eventually end. Suffering.
Well, impermanent though it may be, there is a certain continuity to it. And the idea is that this continuum can go on an upswing, and that upswing can, continue in a way that pleasure does not. That's kind of the main thing. Yeah. Well, this is, I don't know if you have the same version or not. You do?
Yeah, Andy sent
Well, what edition is it? Is that Derge, or it's probably Derge? This is in fact the.
This is from TPRC.
I don't know if this is Derge or not. This is probably Peking edition. Well, I'm looking at page 4, I think.
Page 100.
Huh?
This is page 100.
I'm sorry, 54B. Yeah, so it's a different edition. Okay. Then here's Chandrakirti often ends the discussion with his own verse that he composes, and that is basically saying the same thing. It says, if it were the case that pleasure had some inherent quality of being pleasurable, dogle dukmingur, it would not reverse itself and become suffering. Because it does, because it does in fact become reversed, therefore it does not have that inherent quality. It does not represent some kind of unique, inherent, pleasurable quality. Okay, so that's one verse. Wow, we're going very slowly. Okay, so now this is number 2. Okay, so that was that, but get the difference between these two verses. The first one was that the incremental quality of pleasure versus the incremental quality of pain is fundamentally different, right? Now it says, even though it says there here. So this is niba, and I added the heading, so you'd have to go back. I wanted to keep the outline going, so
We don't have yours.
No.
So we're
but it's on the previous page, right? What happens is when he gets to a certain section, he says, there's 5 sections, right? And then he lists all 5 of them. Then he goes to the first one, and he says the first one has also 2 parts. So, Tibetan outlines can be pretty convoluted. So I just copied and put it in brackets when we, with each verse, so that I can sort of keep track of it. So the first one was the incremental quality. Now here it's talking about Dungel Rangzemba Kiebe Gyuye. Okay, so Dungel Rangzemba means Dungel means suffering. Rangzemba means inherently valid suffering, right? There are causes that generate inherent suffering, things that are inherently suffering, but there are no causes that generate inherently valid pleasure. And so this is now talking about the conditions that produce pleasurable experiences versus the conditions that produce painful experiences, how they are different, and how the fact that they are different indicates that there's no such thing as an inherently valid pleasure. Okay? So it's different, right? Okay, so Kendan Hinchik Dewale Dogba Tongi Dungela Kena Midan Hinchik to Dopa Yugo Maino. So it's saying, so it says, the wording is Kendan Hinchik Dewa, right? So it says, Kendan Hinchik means together with its conditions, right? So the pleasurable experience, together with its conditions, meaning the conditions that produce a particular pleasurable experience, Dokwa Tongi can be seen to be reversed. That the conditions that produce pleasurable experiences also stop being conditions for producing pleasure. So they're not, absolutely and always in every case producing pleasure. On the other hand, in the case of suffering, those things that are recognized as the conditions or the causal factors that generate painful experiences, those don't ever lose that quality. So whatever it is that has the ability to generate pain, you can keep applying that condition and it's going to always produce pain, right? So again, a way of differentiating between the evanescent aspect of what we call pleasurable versus the more, solid, if you like, nature that suffering possesses. Okay, so I translate the verse. The reversal of pleasure along with its condition is seen, right? It can be said we can recognize it, we can perceive it. But there is no reversal of suffering along with its conditions. Right? So, all right, okay? So, so here so what are the conditions? Now here we use as an example, Dewe-gyu, so the conditions or causes that bring pleasurable experiences, uses the example of food. Food is produces the satisfaction of removing hunger, right? Kaze-sok-ten jarna means if you indulge in that food to an excess, then dewa rangi kien, then that pleasurable experience that begins by eating the food, which is the cause of that pleasurable experience, that pleasurable experience, along with its conditions, right, will be reversed. In other words, you keep eating, and eventually it ain't going to be feeling good anymore. It's going to hurt. So, dewa rangi kien na hinsi dewa le dokwa dungel bashik junwa tongi. That can be observed. That can be seen. Suffering, on the other hand, if you resort to some cause of suffering, if you apply something that is painful, tena dungel gikienlam mi tang hinchik tu dopa, that suffering, along with its causes, in other words, those causes don't stop producing suffering, and the suffering that they produce doesn't stop being suffering. So they don't lose their characteristic of being able to generate suffering, and the suffering that they generate doesn't ever turn into something that is enjoyable. Right? So you see the difference between that and the previous verse. Huh? So now here the simile that's given is Ashoka, King Ashoka. King Ashoka is a historical person, lived after the time of the Buddha, in fact, a couple hundred years after the time of the Buddha. And so it says that he had a prison, and that prison was known as Nyamgawa, and Nyamgawa means delightful. A prison, let's see, so enjoyable or delightful, or obviously ironic name for the prison. And it was known. It had according to legend, I guess, it said that the persons who were imprisoned in that place were allowed to choose what kind of physical behavior they would like to experience there. So if they wanted to be standing, they could stand, but they couldn't do anything else. So they would be standing and always standing. If they wanted to sit, they could be sitting and always sitting. If they wanted to lie down, they would be lie down and always lying. If they wanted to be walking, they would always. So any one of those four modes of behavior, Ranggao Jelam. Ranggao Jelam means whatever behavior, whatever physical form behavior they liked or preferred, they were set to doing that kind of behavior. And dene Jelam Shintemba means they were not allowed to engage in any other kind of behavior. And therefore, therefore, what was initially chosen as something that was reasonably pleasant, right? As it was continued, right, that cause of that pleasantness would change, right? It would no longer be a cause of pleasantness, and whatever pleasantness it produced no longer was pleasant and became painful. Similes like that. Okay, so those are two examples. What's interesting about them is the kind of the slight difference in what is focused on in those two verses. I think it's very interesting. Kind of, what's the word? The kind of the logic of those two verses is interesting. Okay, so that's the first section, and that's meant to suggest. Now, notice that nothing in those verses is saying that this is addressing that point about there not being any such thing as a real, inherently real pleasure, right? Distinct from pain. But you can see how these verses really do fit the explanation in Vasubandhu's passage that he attributes to this position, right? So I think that's interesting, and it helps to understand kind of what the verses are sort of where what the source of the idea is and how to better understand what they're trying to say. Okay, so now next section is very interesting. It's a series of verses that all have a refrain. Verse 14, Namba kundu rigmain. Number 15, Namba kunduan rigmain. Number 16, Namba kunduan mirikso. Number 17, Namba kundu rigmain. And number 18, nama kuntu mirikso. Number 19, nama kuntu hikmayin. And yeah, so that's how many? That's 1, 6. Okay, so that nama kuntu hikmayin means it in no way is that reasonable, or in no way is that fitting. All right, and so the idea is that if this is the way that that life is, there's no way to think of this as happiness, or as pleasurable, or as enjoyable. And so this is kind of in a very sort of forceful way, discrediting the idea that there is a pleasant aspect to samsaric existence, which I think is addressing the kind of the question that you had. So here, the first one is relies upon the idea of subtle impermanence, which is saying that well, let's just read the verse. It speaks for itself, I think. So chi shimba la dewa shimba mirikpa. This is the outline is saying that we are chi shimba. Chi shimba means it's the present continuous, to be in the process of dying. Chi shimba. We are constantly in a state of dying, right? We're not dying in the actual sense of dying, but dying in the sense of not staying the same because of our impermanence. And that is a kind of, impermanence is often described as perishing, right? The previous moment disappears and no longer exists. And so there's there is a kind of death in that sense.
Do you want to just clarify for some of us who have difficulty with this difference between changing and impermanent and changing, right? Impermanent being like
impermanent is radical in the sense that the previous moment no longer exists. The moment that follows it is new, never existed before, and as soon as it comes into existence, it also disappears, ceases to exist, and replaced with something else. Change, on the other hand, is something that is observable in through a continuum, and that the observable qualities take on a different form, and that's what changes. So Buddha's idea of movement also is like there's no such thing as movement in Buddhism. Because there's just the continuum. So in one moment, the locus of one moment becomes a different locus in the next moment because of different and there's no such thing as actual movement. There's nothing that moves. There's only, a momentary appearance anyway, yes.
Kundu, which is common to all those verses. And
Kundu means entirely, but it's in the negative. So it's like not at all. So it could be in every way. If it were in the affirmative, it would be is reasonable in every way. So if we put it in the negative and say it's not reasonable in any way, it's in no way reasonable.
okay, just
Kundu are you thinking about what the reference of His Holiness?
oh, of course, that's exactly what I was.
That's
just
different. That's a different phrase. That's a completely different phrase. That's ku. Ku means body. Sakata kashu, like ku sung tuk, body, speech, and mind, right? That's ku. And dun means in front of. Kun dun means in the presence of the body. That's
what I was wondering.
This is not that.
Then I went off on a tangent. Oh, it's like Latin root for,
No.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay,
So,
great.
I'm happy to start a Tibetan class if you want.
I'd love it, but
I'm joking. I'm joking because I am the frustrated Tibetan teacher. I have not been able to persuade enough people to see the value of learning Tibetan. So I don't try anymore.
I'd love to learn.
No, okay. No. I'd love for you to learn too. Okay. Chishimbala, deor shemba mirikpa. So it says, if someone who is always dying, continually dying from moment to moment, it is inappropriate. Mirikpa means inappropriate for that person to be attached to happiness, right? Because there's nobody there to enjoy that experience. You're always, there's no happiness to enjoy, and there's no you there to enjoy it, because you're constantly, becoming something else from moment to moment. So here we have, this is, I don't know what you have a version of oh, you have a, no, I'm mixing up. This is Getzab's commentary. What do you have here right after that Dangoni?
Hlinchik de
Okay,
Weda.
so Hlinchik, that's a typo. Hlinchik means together with, right? But it's actually meant to be Hajin. Hajin. Hajin means Devadatta. Devadatta is like the,
Nemesis.
well, it isn't Buddhist nemesis, but here it's being used as just
A person.
a person, anyone. Joe Smith.
Oh, like John.
Yeah.
David.
Right. So it says, we have statements. We use language. And this is an interesting point, because it's an important idea, which often is not really given its due, which is to say that any philosophical doctrine, whether it's Buddhist or any other for that matter, but if we're talking about Buddhism, no matter what teaching Buddhism puts forth, it should be a teaching, it should be a doctrine which does not contradict ordinary language, everyday language. So everyday language, we should be able to explain everyday language in terms of the Buddhist doctrine. So,
The other way around.
sorry?
You should be able to explain Buddhist doctrine in terms of everyday language.
Right, that's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Did I say it the other way around?
Yeah.
Yes, that Buddhist doctrine should not contradict everyday language, and the idea is that everyday language comes about, right? Exists by virtue of the fact in a time-tested way, that it refers to things that there's universal agreement about, some kind of consistency, especially relating to things like causality, that are observable in ordinary experience. And so in that sense, they are irrefutable. And so if Buddhism comes up with some, cockamamie idea that doesn't make any sense and is completely at odds with ordinary experience, then we shouldn't believe it. So that means every idea that's taught in Buddhism has to fit ordinary language. So to give it a good example, so we say, Devadatta is walking to the store, say, okay? So that language suggests that there is such a thing as a person, right? That's named Devadatta, and that person is able to walk, and we can see that person walking. So how does that square with the Buddhist idea of selflessness? There is no self. There is no real personal self. So how do we interpret the doctrine of selflessness in relation to that ordinary statement, or that statement about ordinary experience? And so without going into it, without taking time to address this kind of tangent, the idea is that Buddhism does not reject the idea of a nominal person or a nominal self, that there is something that we call a self, and we just say it's a mere name. It does not constitute a substantively real thing. So that's kind of where the whole discussion starts. But the point is that Buddhism says, yes, there is a nominal self. And so then what I remember, my Buddhist teachers, kind of one of the ways they put it is there's a self that does exist, and there's a self that doesn't exist. That's kind of a very sort of simplistic way of talking about it, but it's important to recognize things like that. So here in the opening, kind of the lead into this verse, this hypothetical, objection to this position is, we say things like, Lejin Dewa Dandeno, right? That Devadatta is happy. Devadatta possesses happiness. So if we have such statements that say that a person we can identify, we can notice, we can observe, oh, that person's a happy person, maybe lighthearted or, easygoing, or always seems to be enjoying himself. Or so when we use that phrase, is that a phrase that is, meaningless or not? If it's not meaningless, then how does that not contradict the idea that there's no such thing as an inherently pleasurable state? Okay, so this verse then is meant to kind of answer that idea. So if you say that there are inherently identifiable pleasurable experiences, then Aryadeva offers you this. Che is used as the second person pronoun, saying to the reader, you, right? You, Chishin la, Chishin uses this word to be in the process of dying. What is it? So Mriyamana, okay, Mriya comes from the root mur, right? Mur is the verb to die, right? Then Mriyamana is in the process of dying, in the course of dying. So it's like someone's on their deathbed. They're not dead, but they're dying, right? That's Mriyamana, in the process of dying. Present continuous, right? When you are continuously dying, and then it uses this the reference to the 3 times. In the past, you were in the process of dying. Which is dusonwa, means the gone time. The gone time means the past. Gatakala, right? Gatakala means the time which is gone, which means the time of the past. You died in the past. Now, it doesn't mean you died in a previous life. It means in this life, in all the moments before the present one, you underwent the process of dying. And groa means in the going time, which means in the present, right? And in that which is yet to be gone, which means then the future time. All 3 of those aspects, for past, present, and future, you have been dying, or you are dying. You are continually dying in the past, present, and future when that's the case. So that's a reference to subtle impermanence, that you do not survive one instant to the next. You're constantly, being reborn from one moment to the next. So if you're reborn, it means you had to die from the previous moment, right? So if that's the case, that you're dying at all times, you don't stay the same, your existence does not stand still from moment to moment, which of course is, what should I say, counterintuitive to the way we ordinarily think of our daily life. But yet, if you reflect on, and if you accept the Buddhist doctrine of subtle impermanence, then you have to sort of stop and you have to think, oh, well, if that is my, a truer representation of my existence, then how can I think of myself as someone who is enjoying happiness when, there's no time to enjoy it, right? Right, like that. So it says, in no way is it fitting to say that someone who is continually dying is happy. Now, of course, that's not relying on, that's kind of a philosophical statement. It's not a statement about the fact that, the death of a family member is something that is meant to promote grief. It doesn't mean that at all, right? It's really not talking about that. It's talking about, the ever-changing nature of our existence, and the fact that our lives are, you know, kind of out of control, and that we're on a journey that is, you know, is ever changing, and that's the thing that we should be concerned about. And if we're concerned about that, right, then kind of all the ordinary things that we think of when we sort of allow ourselves to be absorbed in samsaric existence, and we operate from the point of view of those four mistaken ideas, right? You know, then we're you know, kidding ourselves, we're deluding ourselves, we're deceiving ourselves, we're doing ourselves a disservice. What we ought to do is we should, you know, become introspective and think about, you know, how, you know, fleeting life is. And if we think of life that way, you know, then the idea of there being any kind of pleasure worth pursuing kind of goes out the window. And that's really a whole, you know, that's a big part of what the aim of renunciation is to sort of draw back and be, you know, be very introspective, be very much inside yourself. And if you're very much inside yourself with that Buddhist mindset, right, you don't care about samsara much in terms of your own personal, you know, goals and pursuits. And that's, I think, kind of what this is. Okay, so that's that first. Let's say, okay, this is an interesting simile. So, so let's read that. So it says, Perna. This is verse 14, right? Usually there's just a mention of the simile, and then there's the explanation of the simile. So the first reference to it is, it says, it says, Dren Nyemba. Dren Nyemba means a bad servant. Dren servant. Nyemba means, you know, someone who doesn't fulfill his servant's role properly. Then it says Nale Sham. Nale Sham is a really obscure Tibetan. It refers to the, I think it refers to the pepper plant, right? You know, because this is coming from India anyway. So he ate peppers. It means black peppers, peppercorns. At least that's one explanation of the term. And Changtumash, you know, and he drank wine, or he drank, you know, beer. So obviously he's not a good servant. So that's the description of the simile. And then here we have the story, which is really, it's a play on words, and it's really beautiful. So the story goes like this: Dren Nyemba Shigji. It says, I'm going back and forth between Chanakirti and Gesar. So Dren Nyemba Shigji, a certain bad servant. Kimdak means then the householder in whose employ he was, or who he's servant for. Kimdak idze mangbo chu semba means he wasted them, or he ruined them. And then so that's the kind of the brief. Let me read it now from Chandakirti. Here's what he says. So he says, Bang Shunu means he's young. So we can write it off as his indiscretion. So he says, Kimda Gashigi, then it says he destroyed the shoes of the master, right? His owner had maybe a nice pair of boots or something, and he didn't take care of them. He ruined them, whatever, left them out in the rain or whatever. And then it says Kyuo means some seat, like maybe had a nice chair or something like that. He ruined that. Then he had a horse. He ruined that. And then here it says, this is a little bit. This is kind of obscure, and I honestly can't make it out. The two translators said went from the house. So it doesn't say house. It says come. Then it says, then he went into a a shed or a storehouse where peppers, where apparently this guy was a person who made his living with pepper plants. So he went into that, and then and he ate some peppers, right? So this is a person's property, and he was eating, and then you also drank. He Gombarcheva means he repeatedly drank some kind of alcoholic drug. So he was you don't want a drunk servant around taking care of your things. Okay, and then it says, and after that, then he was really, off the deep end. And then here it says he caused 1,000. Use the word 1,000. It just means some sort of wealth in the magnitude of 1,000. He squandered it. He squandered 1,000, and then he squandered a second 1,000. So I mean, he was really, wasting the wealth of his master. And then. De la de ganche jawa maimba che kyang ne lar kyang shindu yang ne yangu never jeva. So this is what happened. And so the master, then after his servant had, behaved so badly, the master then confronts him when he discovered what this person had done. And he uses this phrase, right? So anyway, here it says. Let me read it from Chandrakirti because he uses it's a little bit more kind of more words. He puts it in, does it in more words. He says, you did what you shouldn't have done. Jawa maimba means what shouldn't be done, right? So it's kind of a moral phrase. Thing which is not to be done, you did. Even though you did all these things that you shouldn't have, right? That were wrong. Ne lar kyang shindu, right? Lar kyang shindu means I continued to support you. Okay. Don't forget, this is talking about the impermanence, right? Moment to moment. Changing and dying and therefore no happiness. This is what the simile is supposedly illustrating, right? So he says, I supported you, and yet yang ne yangdu nervacheva. Then you repeatedly harmed me, right? You did all these bad things. I took care of you in spite of that. He's now sort of confronting him. And he says, and you did this again and again, repeatedly. Well, this is kind of like over and over. So then he says, pure. He says, the master's talking to the servant. He says, you, jeba, chu serba. Now this is a phrase. Kurta is the word. Kurta it means done. It's from the Sanskrit to do, right? Gara. Kurta means what was done. Kurta nashana. Kurta nashana means to destroy. So destroy what was done, literally. Okay. So, for instance, if there's in a completely different sense, Java in the Lamrim in the karma section, there are 4 sort of axioms of karma, right? Le ngeba, le pelchewa, le majaba le Majaba Damitera and Jeba Chumizawa. Jeba means done. Chumizawa means not ruined. So that means what was done means the karma that you did. Chumizawa means it will never kind of disappear. The seeds of your bad deed will exist with they don't rot. And when the right circumstances come along, you're gonna pay the consequences. Okay, so that's Jeba to Mizawa, right? What was done does not get wasted. Then this is saying Jeba to Sawa, which is what was done is wasted. Okay, Kurta Pranasha is a completely different meaning. but it's an idiom, a Sanskrit idiom. Kurta pranasha, I think it's pranasha, I don't know if it's vipranasha or pranasha, something along those lines. I wrote it down, I think. No, kurta nashana. Okay, nashana means to destroy or cause it to be ruined. Now, this phrase in this usage, not in the negative, is kurta means done, means something which was done for you, some favor, some good that was done to benefit you. Nashana means you destroyed it. It means you kind of like rejected it. It means it's an idiom that means you were ungrateful, right? So you did not. Another phrase is kurta nya. Kurta means what was done. Nya means to know. To know what was done means you recognize, you are aware of, you are cognizant of the fact that some favor was done to you, and so therefore you are grateful. You're someone who knows what was done for them, and therefore will, you show their gratitude in some way. So here, these two phrases are used in the other ones, the kurta anya or something like that, which means you are ungrateful, means you don't know, you are not recognizing what was done for you, and you are ruining, means you are not appreciative of what was done for you. This is what the master says to the servant. You are a good for nothing, ungrateful person. You've done, look what you repay my, taking care of you with ruining all the stuff. That's what he said. Okay. And so the servant says, this is funny. He says, de gan che yang ne yang du nyeva che yang ngala yi tembar gurba che ni java juice. He says, the servant, this is impudent, right? He says, no. He says, the fact is, I harmed you again and again. I did things that were harmful to you over and over. Right? I did actually not harm. I did improper things. Right? Means fault. I did faulty things to you. I did bad things that affected you again and again, and yet you relied on me. You relied on me in spite of that, and therefore you are, and then now he uses these same two terms, but uses them in an ironic sense. Instead of meaning ungrateful, it says, you are a jeba ju sunching, means what you did was wasted, right? Right? So he's saying you ruined yourself by trusting me. He said, right? Jeba ju sunjin and jeba misheba, and you did not know what was done. It means that you are kind of ignorant of the fact that I was doing all these bad things. So it's kind of flipping a word which means ungrateful, and it says you were kind of foolish, in fact, right? You didn't realize what bad things I did on your behalf, or you didn't, what you should have done is you should have fired me. You should have gotten rid of me. So you're the one who, didn't know what was being done, or didn't know what should have been done, or something like that, right? So it's a play on those two terms. So then he says, okay, so that's the story. So you're supposed to go, ha ha, right? That's funny. And then he says, Jiba nam kyang. So now this is the moral, right? The moral is immature samsaric persons are like this, right? In that nur nurbo la sokpa ne, right? From the time that they are a fetus. Nur nurbo means first stage of the embryo, yeah. From that moment, from the very moment of your conception, even, right? Nesum de chishindu Kochan deo. You are looking to say, my life is happy. There's happiness in my life. You want to deceive yourself. You want to tell yourself that there is something happy about samsaric existence, and that is, your, most fundamental mistake. Your most, foolish and ignorant thought is to think that there's something, pleasurable about your existence, when in fact it's, not standing still for even a moment from the time of your conception. That's how you're supposed to. So the servant, kind of wasting all of your wealth is, I suppose, in a sense, kind of indicative of the fact that life is what should I say? Not pleasant, right? It is a kind of disaster, so to speak, and it's continually in that mode, and yet we don't do anything about it. So that's, and then so you take the kind of the refraining verses, and that is in no way is that proper thing to do or be. Okay, so I kind of went overboard with the explanation of that verse. Let's see. Maybe we can just sort of go through some of the rest of these 6 and see how they're similar. Okay, so the next one is actually these are interesting. Okay, so next one says this one is actually, we can't kind of just skip over it. So maybe we'll do this one and then we'll have to stop. So it says the next verse is, let's see, 9, 10. Get my pages out of order here. Am I right? Is it Sumba or
Niba.
Where did I do that?
Shenyang. It's Nima Ni.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, Niva. Okay, Niva. Nurshimba Dewa Shimba Mirikwa. Nurshimba. Okay, so this one actually is not difficult. Nurshimba means again, it's this present continuous. Nurshimba means we are continually in a state of being harmed. Okay. Nurshimba Dewa Shimba Mirikwa. Okay, so the fact that we are continuing in a state of being harmed, the samsara is, a painful sort of state, and so therefore we should not, in any way, think of it as pleasant, right? Because we are constantly experiencing harm. Right? So the previous one was they kind of was set up by saying. We make these statements. Devadatta is happy. Devadatta experience is happy. So this one, how is this one introduced? Do tamje do. Truba membe chiwa dagi sunwala dewa chadanya lapa mela pashikuna seki. This one doesn't. This one doesn't give an opposing view. It says, in addition to the fact that we are always in the grasp of the Lord of Death from moment to moment, not only do we not have the opportunity to experience pleasantness, we also are exposed to the causes of suffering continuously. And that is the kind of predominant condition that we undergo. And therefore, it is inappropriate to view 가르사 lost my place again. Wait, Dungel la dewe dushe mirikso. Dungel means that which is actually suffering. It is inappropriate. That's the main final statement in the line in each verse that says inappropriate to think of what is suffering as in any way pleasant. Okay? So again, so this verse is saying our kind of underlying condition is that we have to endure some kind of unpleasantness continually. And therefore, we should not think of anything in our everyday life as being pleasant. Okay, so Lujen Namla. Lujen means actually it's interesting that he uses that word. Lujen means embodied being, right? There's usually the word is Semjen. Semjen means it's translating sattva, right? Which doesn't literally mean animate being, but so anyway, Luchen means dehin. Dehin means having a body, deha. So it's focusing on our physical, aspect. So those embodied beings are when they are continually or constantly subject to the harms of hunger, etc. Right? Then it's not fitting to say that one who is being harmed is happy. So the premise of this verse is that our condition, our biological condition, is that we, especially due to our physical being, is that we are in a state where if we don't take care of our body, it's going to, cause problems for us. So our bodies are sort of prone to kind of cause trouble for us. And therefore, we have no choice but to constantly look after the body, right? And that is almost like, something that an inescapable condition of constantly having to get up every day and take care of, preserve our body some way or another, whatever, by feeding it, by making sure we get enough exercise, and any other of various kinds of things. So it's saying that if given that aspect of our existence, then we shouldn't, have this idea that somehow life is, what is it? Flowers and music, pleasant music playing in the background. Life is tough, and we shouldn't delude ourselves. So so we are always being subjected to various conditions that will, if we don't attend to them, will cause us harm. Therefore, it's totally inappropriate to think that we are in some way, our life is filled with happiness. Berna, wait, this simile is the daughter-in-law, the bride who comes to live in a family. And in Indian families, right, that when a young bride comes into a new family, she has a tough time.
Very.
Especially her husband's mother is usually the one who is kind of calling the shots, right?
And
So,
Tibetan.
Huh?
And the Tibetan culture, same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. So this image is saying, well, I won't read it, but basically it says this young bride came into the house and she wanted to have more authority. She wanted to be able to make decisions about what to do, and what she should do and what she shouldn't do, as opposed to being told what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And so the mother-in-law says, okay, fine, and gave her responsibility for doing everything, And then the fact that she realized how much she actually had to do. She realized, how much of a burden, how much of a task it was to take care of the household, even though she was free to do it on her own. And the idea of that was something that she wanted kind of disappeared. So that kind of it's interesting that that notion of irony is kind of the dominant theme in all of these similes, especially coming from someone like Chandrakirti. Okay, so we'll let that one go. Maybe we can squeeze in one more. This one's very interesting because it's talking about the physical body again. It's talking about the four elements, right? That the body is made up of the four elements. And it says that the idea is that our physical constitution is such that our health is a kind of delicate balance. And that the four elements, each of the four elements, cannot exist, cannot maintain the body individually, that all four of the elements together make the body. The body is constituted of the four elements, and all four of them are essential to the maintaining of our physical well-being, whereas each one of those four elements on its own has a quality which in some circumstances is antagonistic to the others. And so if any one of them gets out of balance or becomes stronger than the rest, then we face some threat to our health. And so this is putting a lot of focus on the fact that the truth of suffering, not all of it, but a lot of the truth of suffering stems from our physical existence. And the notion of samsara is rebirth, and rebirth is manifested by taking on a physical frame in which to live our life. And so a lot of the sort of remember we were talking about a couple of classes ago, the notion of indisposition, and that the nature of suffering is most evident through our physical body. Our physical bodies are something that inherently have some quality to them that can be an obstacle for our everyday existence, and especially for our spiritual development, that there are elements of. So for instance, in shamatha, right? Shamatha is a kind of a critical and essential attainment of one point of concentration that without which you cannot cultivate vipassana, and without vipassana cultivating it jointly with shamatha, you can't achieve a transcendent realization. So when they talk about shamatha, right? In shamatha, if you in the traditional Lamrim presentation, which comes from various sources, talk about the 9 states of mental stability or mental fixedness, and there's a point at which you achieve samadhi, 9th level, but you have not yet attained shamatha, and what is remaining in order to culminate in to attain shamatha. By the way, is a state of one point of concentration that is technically still part of the desire realm, but it's one of the sort of 6 preliminary stages that precede achieving the first dhyana, which is the level of the form, first level of form. So in order to, so it's a samten dambu nyerdok. Samten dambu nyerdok is shine is that. So there's Xinjiang, right? This prasarabdhi is one of the is a virtuous quality that only comes up in context of meditation, really. And that Xinjiang is evident when the indisposition disappears. So when you overcome indisposition, then what replaces it is some kind of Xinjiang, often translated as ease. But it really, literally, that Xinjiang means the quelling of the indisposition. So they talk about it, they talk about a physical form of Xinjiang and a mental form of Xinjiang. And I think the physical one precedes the mental one when you're going to achieve shamatha. And what marks the attainment of physical Xinjiang is that there's some quality of indisposition in your four elements, is the way it's described in the Shauka Bhumi, that is a kind of resistance. It's this nanling, right? That sort of holds your mind back. And then at some point, as your concentration, is refined, becomes sufficiently refined, that indisposition, then, which is built into your four elements, right? Which is some quality of the four elements that's kind of holding the mind back a little bit. It kind of is overcome. When it's overcome, that indisposition sort of disappears, and then your body takes on a certain kind of suppleness, which is this prasarabdhi. So even at that level, at a very subtle level, they're talking about how the four elements are, a kind of obstacle to your meditation, right? So this is talking at a much more kind of basic and sort of fundamental kind of condition within your physical elements that also, is present in your being, and that given that you have that built into your physical being, you should not rejoice and think, everything is wonderful, right? That's kind of what the verse says. So it says, it is interesting because this first phrase says, Nuva mebe, jungun la, sokba she cha gyurte. So this is saying, Nuva meve literally means they are inadequate, right? They don't have the power, each one on their own. So the earth element on its own cannot produce your physical body, nor can the water element, nor can the fire element, nor can the wind element. None of them individually is sufficient, right? Nuamere, right? Now there's another word, another meaning, and I don't know if that's what. So there's the basic Sanskrit word is samartha. Samartha means then it's basic word which means to have the power or the ability. So asamartha means lacking power. But there's a second meaning. Let's see, we're at verse
18.
Is that 18? Yeah. Okay, so there's another meaning of it, which means sameness of aim, or sameness of purpose, sameness of meaning, similar or suitable aim. So it has both of those meanings. It has the meaning of being inadequate, and it has the meaning of not having a common purpose. Each one has its own sort of countering kind of quality to it. Mm-hmm. So I think probably both of those meanings are implicit here, even though the Tibetan only kind of addresses the idea of not being inadequate on its own to produce the body. So therefore it says, due to their inadequacy, or due to their their lack of common purpose. I think both of those meanings are in the first part. It says, therefore, the elements Junggun, all the elements together, all four of the elements as a collection, right, are what take birth. So it's, it's addressing this idea, this doctrine that physical form, every atom contains all four of the all four of the primary elements in it. And says, okay, so it's saying that our physical form has qualities of all four of the elements built into them, and the first one says they're not all sort of in sync necessarily with one another, and then the last line says when they are antagonistic, when you have within you qualities that are antagonistic or hostile to one another, then it was totally inappropriate to say that you're in a state of ease, so to speak, right? Sukha, or that's some kind of well-being, that you have these forces, these physical forces inside you that are, if they get in the slightest way out of balance, will cause you illness or worse, right? So it's saying recognize that about your physical nature. So it's basically, look at your physical nature in a more, deeper way, and appreciate, the fragility of your being, and the fact that your body is not making life easy for you, and it's kind of a burden that you have to carry. And part of it is because of the nature of the elements. It's kind of what the verse is saying. Now, there's an interesting description in I'm running out of time, but the way they're talked about here is interesting. In Chandrakirti talks about the four elements. Okay, he says pleasure. He starts off by saying pleasure and pain depend upon the body, right? That our physical body is kind of the main source of, our overt pleasures and our pain, right? Okay. And this body also is a collection, right? This is a word, collection of the four elements, right? Jumachambo means the Mahabhutas, right? Of the four great elements. It's produced by a collection of the four elements. Okay? And it says, Jumachambo yang rere la lu number. So the body cannot be produced by any one of those elements individually. It's only when they are collectively present that your body can be formed, he says. So that's sort of the starting point of the verse, the first half of the verse. He's saying that. And then he says, Nur is the first stage of fetal development, right? When it's said to be like whey, very kind of watery. Sa meba means if the earth element, right, were not present during the first stage of fetal development, then, and so this gets into kind of the original Buddhist idea of what the quality of the elements are. So there are four elements. Each of the elements has its essential nature, its role, right? And then it has its action. It has its function. What does it accomplish in terms of, this is kind of talking about the principal qualities in the natural world. So the earth element is, its essential nature is some kind of hardness, right? And its action is that of supporting, of keeping things from sort of dissipating, right? So it says, during the first stage of fetal development, if you did not have the earth element, they would not be able to hold up. They would sort of, naturally sort of fall apart. Therefore, what is it? What do? Oh yeah, what do? So it literally says it would fall, right? But the nature of the earth element is that it kind of this forms the quality of supporting things. And then he says, if it did not have the water element, then the water element is, of course, fluidity is its essence, and the main action of water is cohesion, which is an interesting idea. So cohesion is sort of like, it's like if you take something that's powder, right? Powder would, be able to kind of disperse, right? But water, if you present water to something that is in kind of watery form and sand-like particle-like form, that will coalesce it. And so that's this idea of cohesion means that it's sort of what's the word? Sangraha. Yeah, sangraha means like it holds it together. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the water's main essence. And the chukamki dubenan. So water sort of holds it together, and then so it takes on this sort of globular form, this globular gongbungo, sort of this round like quality. Otherwise, gematar, like sand, do charap rirne torwa. Otherwise, each of the atoms that make up whatever your physical form is in the fetus would, sort of each go its own way, sort of break into little parts that did not hold together. That's saying that. Totally more nguro. May come mebergunani dates in nunurbo drew or if the fire element wasn't present, then that same first stage of fetal development would, and then this is the word, is it would literally, it would rot, it would putrefy, it would it would become well, let's see, where is it? No. Yeah, it may come. All right, so the fire element keeps it dry. It keeps it, and therefore it does not putrefy. And then if it lacked the wind element, it would not be able to grow. It would not be able to develop. It would stay constant, right? So these are this description is saying what is the positive quality that the elements bring to your physical development, right? In the absence of any one of those, you wouldn't survive. He says, nevertheless, so if any one of them was lacking, then the body would not form, and therefore all of them are necessary as a collection in order for a living body to be able to develop. And it says, on the other hand, the nature of the four elements is that they are mutually antagonistic. They also are work against each other. And he says, the earth element lungi kamki dr so the earth element obstructs the motility of the wind element. Right? The wind element causes the earth element to be when it's dispersed, right? Dispersed. It strives to disperse the hardness, right? So the earth element obstructs physical growth, and the wind element, is if it becomes too strong, it would cause the body to fall apart. Water element works against the fire element. Fire element also tries to dry out the water element. Therefore, the four elements, even though they must be present in order to form the body, as the body continues to exist, they also have the potential to be at odds with one another. So this is kind of the way this verse is being fleshed out, what it's meant to be suggesting. So given kind of this balance that exists among the four elements, and the fact that they can be at odds with one another, then our body is something that is unstable, and not in a state of ease and relaxation. Because of the ability of these antagonistic qualities to generate suffering, therefore it's very difficult for there to be a state of true ease, of true well-being in our body. Therefore, the body's essential nature is one of being a state of unsatisfactoriness. Okay, so here's the simile is like 6 animals, and then they give you a list of the animals. There are animals that are either predators or prey, and they were all tied together with one rope, and they would not be able to survive in connection with one another. So it says a horse, a jackal, a snake, a bird, a deer, and a crocodile. All of them, if they were put together and tied together with one rope, they would create chaos. It doesn't say chaos, but obviously it means they would try to eat each other, kill each other. All right. Okay, so maybe that's it for today. A little bit past, but I mean, this is a pretty strong. If you really unpack these verses, the claim that they're making. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to cram it down your throat, or saying this has to really move you. But I think for me the challenge, and what I see as the purpose of what I'm doing here, is to try to convey as fully as possible what the kind of import of the verses is. And I think if you understand them clearly, they make a very strong sort of claim, I think. And then it's up to you to decide, how much validity to attribute to it. But anyway, I think they're very interesting. Think of it. I mean, these verses are, pushing 2,000 years old. And, aside from maybe some of the, scientific, the physiology, the simplicity of the physiology, they're certainly not nonsense. And I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but to me, I think they speak pretty clearly. And anyway, I find them, how should I put it? I find them, aesthetically very pleasing, and in their own way, informative. In terms of sort of clarifying the nature of Buddhist doctrine. I mean, you think Vasubandhu's Aryan Kosha Vasha. I mean, he's a couple hundred years after Aryadeva, but still, what, 4th or 5th century, something like that. And I, at the very least, I can say it's interesting. And to me, I mean, that's kind of, I'll leave you with this. I mean, to me, that's the element of Buddhism that I find most appealing, is that the literature is there, and if you have access to it, it does, it does speak to you, and it is, and to me, I think it's very informative, and you can always sort of find something new. I don't know that there's any text that is exactly like Aryadeva's 400 verses. I think it's pretty unique. He was the primary disciple of Nagarjuna, but I don't think any of Nagarjuna's writings, especially in the first 8 chapters, which are sort of kind of more basic Buddhist values, Nagarjuna doesn't. I mean, I don't know, maybe he's saying things that are a little more, what's the word, more ethereal, but I think Aryadeva's treatise has great value. And it's mentioned in the Lamrim, verses here and there, but I think, it's, if you have the opportunity, you got to take a piece of writing in its totality and read the whole thing, in order, before you take the measure of it, or I think it's required in order for you to fully appreciate, what that author does have to say. So anyway, we don't often have that opportunity, but anyway, it's an ideal. So I'll leave you with that. Okay. Darani rindu bele tonini Katarayang bakan shik sak bande Lo me mari ki dong drowanam Nam jengya we wambo da yuji Dharma sambe tira kundu yang Chambe yang yi se we jesune Embe limba kun san lang yi cho Nene drube gena nye she jo Rangi jishin tobe langi ne Shura tsewe jangbe tabegi Jowe yigi mba se jene Yawe denba yurin zingyuji Denba rinjin jogi makyabam Kya nyamba gyube chodani Ninje chembo yira gyubari Pende tende sawa jebasho Seje gyawe me jumjin lele Le dru chanju langirin begyan Landu namgi ila bedajin Gyawe zebarin du gyong gyujik
Lam san dru be du gen dru je jin. Ge ge se je mi dan mi mi gun. Se ra gun du gya we na ba yi. Nam na lam dan re wa ma gyu ji. Dan ze de ba cho la ju ju ju. Su jin ru la zun ba de yi se. Tun den nam gi ga tu dro je jing. Ra ji gya zu jo kun kyang yo ro ji. Gawa di ge wo kun sonan ye she zo zo shin. Sonan ye she le jong wen. Tamba kunyi to ba ro.
There's I have to tell you about our schedule. There is visiting abbot from India, from Surmay, and next weekend he'll be in Howell. He's been up in Connecticut for a while. He's the recent abbot of Surmay. He was the former abbot of Utah, and also a monastery still has its representatives in India. It's called Segyu Monastery, which was a very important early Galupa Tantra monastery, first Tantra monastery. Anyway, he's visiting. Next weekend wouldn't be a conflict, but the following weekend he's going to be down in DC area, and I was asked to translate for him, and I'm obligated to do so. So that means that 2 weeks from today, which was supposed to be next class, we'll be able to meet. He's going to be around till middle of July. I don't know whether I will or will not need to, help him beyond going down to DC. So it's possible that we can still have a class in maybe either the end of June or in July, at least one perhaps. But I can't say at this point like what would be available. So I'll let Andy know, and then maybe I'll try to give you at least 2 weeks, if not more, heads up. So you can decide whether to make time to go or not. But anyway, that's something that is sort of in the wind at this point. So just wanted to let you know. Next 2 weeks from today, it's definitely not available. But I promise we'll keep going. I'm willing. I mean,